Ruth, welcome to the show again.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, today what we really want to go into is this metapsychiatric concept that all problems are psychological and all solutions are spiritual. Now that sounds like gobbledygook at the beginning, so you have to explain that to us. First of all, how can all problems be psychological?
It sounds very blameworthy, doesn't it?
Yes.
Like there's something wrong with me. I've created this problem for myself, and that's very off-putting to many people, so they don't like to hear the principle. But Dr. Horror was unequivocal about it. Either it's a principle or it is not. And so how can we understand it? What does it mean that problems are psychological? Dr. Horror explained it in a very simple way. He said, we suffer from what we want and what we don't want. That's all.
So if my car breaks down, how is that a psychological problem?
Well, it may not be. Maybe if you see it from a spiritual perspective, that you would welcome it as an opportunity to learn something. Maybe you haven't paid attention to your car.
So what's the problem is that I get upset that my car broke down and that I'm going to miss this appointment that I thought was important, or that I have to spend a lot of money getting the engine fixed, that's what makes it a problem, the way I'm thinking about it.
Yes. Yes, not that it may not be a problem, because it certainly can be a problem if you have a serious illness or a death in the family. You know, these can be very difficult situations to understand from a spiritual perspective, but they are still opportunities.
Well, it's serious. They're serious things. They may require more time or more attention than I might have considered. And they may actually be painful in some kind of way. But that doesn't mean that it's a problem. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's right. A problem is actually, as we said, something that we are either wanting or not wanting. So if we look to the source of it in our thoughts rather than on the material level, then we might understand something. We might learn something. We might learn to spiritualize our consciousness about that particular situation. So that's what, when we say problems are lessons designed for our edification, that's another one of the principles in metapsychiatry. This calls us to pay attention to what is taking place so that we may see it as an opportunity to grow spiritually.
Well, can you give us some examples of maybe in your own life or people you've worked with so we can help understand this?
Yes, okay. Let's look at the rest of the principle first, however,
good.
Which is, if I might suggest, that we don't get stuck on the problem level, but that we look at it as an opportunity to spiritualize our consciousness. So when Dr. Horror says all problems are psychological, meaning they're thoughts that are manifesting themselves in a certain form, and that all solutions are spiritual, means that the only way to solve the problem is not on the level of the problem, but on the level of the spiritual. So to give you an example, the first time, actually, after I'd been studying for metapsychiatry for a couple of years, I became very ill in the middle of the night. And I had to be taken down to the emergency room at the hospital. And the doctor diagnosed that I had a serious case of flu. And I returned home with a little vial of medicine that I was supposed to take. I could hardly breathe. That's what took me to the hospital. And I had a very, very high fever. And I spent the night looking at that little vial, thinking, you know, I've learned enough about what reality really is, and I have been studying this principle for a long time, but I haven't applied it to myself in a serious situation, so this is my opportunity. So I spent the whole night just looking at that little vial. I didn't dare go to sleep because I was afraid that I would perhaps pass out in the middle of the night. And I stayed awake, and I went moment by moment, step by step, because I was going to take it if obviously my life was in danger. I'm not that foolish. But I thought, I wonder if I can wait till the morning with these symptoms that I was experiencing. I could hardly breathe. That was the main one, and a very high fever, 103. And if I can wait until the morning, I will call Dr. Horror and see if he can understand what the meaning of it is, what the thought, that is to say, that is manifesting itself in that form, what that is. And I did manage to stay awake until the morning, and at crack of dawn, I think it was about 7 o'clock, I dared to call him, and he answered the phone, and he was totally awake right with me, and I told him about it. And he said, well, what you're suffering from is fear right now. He knew enough about my life to know what I was afraid of, and he said, you need to heal that fear. And he gave me the spiritual counterfact to it, which is perfect love casteth out fear. So rather than being afraid, that I instead could see that sense of love was what was needed, and understanding, and forgiving myself for entertaining these fearful thoughts, and a lot of other things that I really can't go into because it's too personal. But the idea, what happened was that I suddenly began to feel well. Suddenly I began to feel better. Within a half an hour after speaking to him, the fever started to dissolve, and the breathing was gone. I felt so well that I went up and took a shower and came back and sat on my bed, and I got dressed after a few more minutes. And I couldn't believe it, because the doctor had said, you have a very serious case of flu, and you'll probably be in bed. This is back in 1980 or so. He said, you'll probably be in bed for 3 or 4 weeks, or certainly confined to home. Thanksgiving was coming, and he said, forget about Thanksgiving. You'll probably still not be feeling well at Christmas time. And I thought, well, you know, this is not what's happening. What's happening is that I was being healed. So within an hour of talking to Dr. Hora, the fever was gone and the symptoms were gone, and it was the most extraordinary demonstration of the fact that the thought that I had been suffering from was actually the manifestation of, or the symptoms were the manifestations of that thought.
Well, let's go back and apply this to what we talked about just at the beginning, right? So it's, say, my car breaking down, which is similar to you having the flu, right?
Yes.
Getting sick.
Yes.
So it's not that the flu, whatever it is, if there's a virus or something going through your body, that's not the problem. The problem is how you were thinking about it, right? That for you, it was the fear that you had about being sick, or something else?
No. I was in a state of fear.
Okay.
I did not understand that. And the fear transmuted itself. You know, thought is mental energy, and it has to go somewhere. And it follows a pathway of, the first way a thought manifests is through speech, or with ideas, and then through speech. And then we can catch it at that point. If we don't catch it at that point, let's say we're angry or fearful, and then it moves to the next level, which is to come out in a form of behavior or some mood, some sense of being lost. And if it doesn't come out in that form, it comes out in the form of a physical symptom or an experience. And so this fear that I had been entertaining for apparently quite some time manifested itself in the form of a physical symptom. It didn't cause the physical symptom, it just was appearing in that form. So mental energy transmutes into other forms, just like ice is another form of water, or vapor is another form of water. The same thing happens with thoughts.
So when Dr. Hora suggested or pointed out to you that you were suffering from having a fearful thought,
yes.
So then what happened? Did you stop being afraid at that moment, or what?
Well, he identified specifically what it was, because of course he knew me very well, and he knew what my issues were in life. And he was able to see that I was feeling suffocated by something. That's why I couldn't breathe. And when I understood that I didn't need to suffer, that's not part of my true being, that actually God is the source of my good, not anyone else, not myself, once I was able to see that very clearly, then the symptoms started to dissolve. That's the way that the principle works. The problem is psychological in the sense that it's a thought, and the solution is spiritual in that once I understood what we call the spiritual counterfact to fear, and applied that in my life, reminded myself that I am loved, and that I am able to understand see myself in a greater context, in the context of God actually, and my oneness with God, that the symptom dissolved. It just disappeared.
So let me just go through this again, because this is, you're talking about something that sounds miraculous, right, to us.
Yes.
We're so steeped in this idea that illness is caused by some sort of physical cause.
Yes.
And so what you're suggesting to us is that even physical illness, not just my car breaking down, but even physical illness is actually a psychological problem. and that there is a spiritual solution to it. So let's just go over
Yes.
this a little slower. So there was some experience in your life, some event or some situation where you felt suffocated by. You had this thought that this situation is suffocating me. And so what was going on in your own mind was, there's no way out of this, or how do I get out, or this is suffocating me. Now in reality, in spiritual reality, that's not true. But you thought that it was.
Well, actually, Nancy, I wasn't even aware of the thought.
Okay.
So that's what I needed Dr. Hora for, was to help me to understand the thought.
So you weren't even aware that you were in a situation that you thought was suffocating?
Not at all. No, that was beyond my awareness. Had I been aware of it, it wouldn't have been turned into a symptom. It's because you're not aware of it that it manifests in another form. And that symptom or behavior or activity or action, whatever it happens to be in your life, your mood, is a thought. For us to come to understand that everything is a thought, that we live in a mental universe, not so much the phenomenal world, but a mental universe, and that everything is a thought, is a very liberating idea. However, it's very threatening because it sounds like, oh, I'm to blame. And so we need to be very careful when we introduce this thought to people, that no one is to blame for anything. This is all new knowledge. It's cutting edge stuff. And just applying it, trying to understand it in our everyday life, people do come to realize it is true, that all problems are psychological.
So how do you know it's true? I mean, what else can you tell us about it so that we can help understand that this is true?
The way you understand that it's true is that you are healed. You are uplifted. You are liberated. All these wonderful things occur when you understand the spiritual solution to the problem. When you understand, first you have to understand the problem. So all problems have meanings, and we call a meaning a mental equivalent. So we actually have two questions that we ask in metapsychiatry whenever there is a problem. And the first question is, what is the meaning of what seems to be? And the second question is what really is? Now these two questions stand in contrast to the kinds of questions we normally ask, which is to look for the cause. So the first thing we say is, okay, what happened? What happened? And the second is, how do you feel? And the third is, well, what should we do about it? Who's to blame? And then we come to, what should I do and how should I do it? Rather than asking those questions, we refrain from that temptation because we're all steeped in that kind of questioning and say, no, 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 no. The idea here is that everything is a thought. So we're going to ask the first intelligent question, what is the meaning of what seems to be going on? Let's say a physical symptom, the doctor has diagnosed as a flu, and we're going to say, what's the mental equivalent of that? The meaning refers to the mental equivalent, not the cause of it, but the mental equivalent. So once you find that, and in that particular example that I gave from my own life, it was the fear of being out of control and suffocating from what was experienced, what I perceived, that is to say.
And so then what is really true? What was really happening, that once you could go to that thought, how did that apply healing to the
spiritual counterfact of that specific thought? So that's the second intelligent question. What really is? What really is spiritual good. So what did I need to see there? I needed to see that no one was in control of my life, including myself, that there was no need to be afraid because God is always available. Omniactive love intelligence, what we've spoken about before, and that I am one with that love intelligence. I am an entity of awareness, we could say, capable of being aware of what is needed moment by moment. And what was needed was not fear, but to understand that perfect love takes care of me. Perfect love takes care of all of us. It gives us the right ideas, and the right idea is simply that no one else is in control of my life, nor myself.
So the idea, if we take this also to the example of the car breaking down, instead of seeing it first as a problem, I say, oh, but I know what's really true is that God's in charge.
Yes.
And that whatever's happening, so maybe, who knows what this is going to lead to. and what it's going to lead to in my life, but I can handle this. I'm okay right now, and I can take the next step, whatever that might be, and take it from there.
Except we wouldn't even say we can handle it, because you see, we can't do it.
That's right. See, there I am, trying to handle it again.
It's so normal, isn't it?
That's right. I want to be in charge. I want to feel like there's something important about me, and that what's important about me is that I can handle this.
I can do it.
I can do it. I can do it.
All by myself.
And that's what you're saying is not what's really true.
That's right. Because you see, we're never alone. This idea that we have, that we are separate from this higher intelligence, is the problem. But when we begin to realize we are one with it, that it is what we are, that we are that loving, intelligent force, and that therefore all we need to do is to become aware of it. We meditate to become still and mentally, to become aware of the inspired ideas that are needed. So each one of us, as we learn to apply the two intelligent questions in our lives, is able to find more and more the understanding that those two questions reveal and can heal ourselves. At first, it's very helpful to have someone who is trained in this to help us to discern the meaning of our problems.
Trained, but also they have to deeply understand what's really true, right? Because it's more than just a mental thing.
It's not mental at all.
It's not an analysis. I mean, I think some people could take this and say, well, this means that and this means that, and they kind of go to an intellectual, analytic mode, right?
Yeah.
And that's really not what you're talking about.
No, not at all. In fact, you have to set your thinking mind aside, because if you try to figure it out, you will never do so. When we figure things out, we're really just coming up with reasons. He who finds reasons finds excuses, right? So that's not what we're talking about at all. You have to set your thinking mind aside.
Well, let me give you another example, and let's use this one, a real practical one that people experience. I was talking to someone the other day, okay, whose boyfriend had just left. And so one of the thoughts might be, well, what it means is I'm ugly and undesirable, right? And so we know that that's not true. But if someone believes that and thinks that, then what? So then what would you say?
Well, you know, it's a process of education, Nancy. It's a slow process. It doesn't happen overnight that somebody's going to grasp what you're going to be saying to them, so you plant seeds little by little. But the first thing you could say is, do you know who you really are? Because if we're thinking of ourselves as being unattractive or undesirable, then we're seeing ourselves as persons. We're back in the human scene again. And we're not going to be able to find the answers on that level. But if you know that you are actually divine, that you are a divine consciousness, that you're capable of seeing yourself in a context of God, then you become assured. You build, your self-esteem changes. Normally our self-esteem is psychological. It's based on what other people think of us as well as what we think of ourselves. But that makes us very vulnerable if we're always basing our judgment of ourselves on how other people might see us. So, but spiritual self-esteem is knowing who you are, is realizing who you are, and that there never is a separation from that intelligence and that love that always is available to be seen, and that gives us a sense of assurance and peace and gratitude and love in the world. So we get back to Pegel again.
Well, you know, I have two thoughts in my mind. One of them is that what do you have to talk about at parties with people then? Because everybody's always talking about problems, right?
Yes.
Everybody wants to tell you about the pains they have and the frustrations and how bad life is and the state of the world. And so how do you manage that?
Well, non-verbally, because you don't want to engage in that kind of communication, because it not only hurts you, but it's not true. And it's all right for other people to be speaking that whatever they think. We're not trying to influence anyone. We're not trying to change anyone. We're just grateful that we can see something from a higher perspective, that life really is good, and that problems are lessons designed for our edification, that nothing comes into experience uninvited. These are all principles of metapsychiatry that we can be grateful for and we can pay attention to and learn from if we're interested. But we don't influence other people. We're not interested in ever influencing others. As a matter of fact, that's the cardinal sin of metapsychiatry.
The other thought I had was what a wonderful phrase it is to talk about spiritual self-esteem.
Yes, everyone suffers from a lack of self-esteem.
Yes. Go on, say more about that.
Well, at one moment we might feel great about life because everything is going well, and the next minute we're down in the dumps. So that's psychological self-esteem. It's vulnerable to what's going on around us and the way we view things. But spiritual esteem, self-esteem, is never lost. It's all, once we get it, that we're one with the divine, that we're one with this one mind, this one consciousness, omniactive love intelligence, and that we can never be separated from it, and that our good comes from it, then we have a whole different way of seeing life, and we never suffer again from a lack of self-esteem.
Now, you never suffer again, but that doesn't mean you don't run into challenges, right? That your car doesn't break down, or that you don't get sick or something, right? It's a different kind of way of looking about things.
Yes, but you know, it's also true that the more you understand the truth of your being, the more the healthier you become, and the less those problems seem to come into your life. It's an amazing thing. I've gotten healthier as I've grown older. Not filled with more sickness. I used to have a lot of problems in my life. They're not there anymore. They just seem to not be there because I'm seeking to live anyway, as much as possible on the level of spiritual consciousness.
Well, so how do you keep from having people accuse you or having this slip into Pollyannaism, or that, you know, everything is wonderful and beautiful all the time and everything is goodness and light, when clearly we live in a world which is filled with turmoil and frustration and troubles?
Well, again, we're not here to change other people, because each one of us has to travel our own spiritual journey. I'm just grateful that metapsychiatry is giving me the kind of knowledge that has been helpful to me, and that I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share that with many individuals, and I see that their lives are also becoming healthier and are improving in every direction, and that's just a great blessing. So it's not that we're trying to change anything in the world, but to offer individuals the opportunity to understand where suffering comes from and how it can be healed with spiritual means.
So what would you say? Where does suffering come from? What could you say to that?
Well, again, it's this very simple idea that I think I mentioned earlier, which is that it comes from wanting and not wanting. And that sounds so crazy that it's hard to get your awareness around it, right?
Yeah.
But in fact, it's true. I mean, the more I've lived with that idea, it's been 25 years now, the more I realize it's absolutely true, and everyone I work with comes to understand that as well. So it must be true.
Well, so suffering comes from wanting or not wanting. Well, what else is there?
Nothing. Oh, what else besides suffering?
Yeah, no, what else besides wanting something or not wanting it?
Oh, wanting.
So then how it's either I want something or I don't want something.
Yes.
Either I want to avoid something from happening or I want to have something happen in my life. What else is there?
There's wanting what God wants. Wanting what God wants. Now, what does God want? I mean, this is, of course, God doesn't want anything, but to keep it in the same idiom, what does God want? God wants to be manifested through his image and likeness. And as a matter of fact, that's what gave birth to metapsychiatry. When Dr. Hora, after his search worldwide through all the wisdom literature, through a great many wisdom literatures, he came back to that idea that's found in the book of Genesis, which is that man is created in the image and likeness of God. And when he realized that that was true, then he understood something that was that helped him to see that we're here for God, we're not here for ourselves. And his paraphrase of the image and likeness of God actually is that we are manifestations of omniactive love intelligence.
Well, I want to stop you there because you said something so profound. I just want to highlight it for people, which is the idea that we're here for God. We're not here to have life mold to the way we want it.
Yes.
And I think that shift in itself is completely profound and will change everything.
It does. And there are three, actually, we say three modes of being in the world. The first is to be here for yourself. The second is the altruistic, which is being here for others. And the third, which is radical, as you pointed out, is being here for God. But we have to understand, what does it mean to be here for God? So to be here to manifest omniactive love intelligence, to manifest Pegel, to live that level of consciousness, because as we live that, it radiates out around us, and everything around us is benefiting from it.
To live what God is, which is this love intelligence,
Yes.
which is this sense of peacefulness, gratefulness, lovingness, assurance, right?
That's right.
That's what God wants. That's what we're here to do, is to be that here for God, rather than to be here to have life be the way I want to have it.
Right. So God wants to be manifested, and it's through us that we can consciously know God. See, that's the point. That many people still say, well, you can't know God, or you can't know God directly, or how can you describe God? But actually that's not true. Those are old ideas. And that the fact that some people have not been able to understand it doesn't mean that others haven't. That many people do. So we are here to manifest God. Without man, God would not be known.
Now, when you say we're here to manifest God, we just have a couple of moments left, do you mean in a physical way? Manifestation, I always think of as sort of matter, right? Is that what you're thinking?
It's
Is that
right
what you're
here
saying?
and now, Nancy, isn't it? Right
Yes.
here and now, in this world, in this phenomenal world, in this seeming body that I am, I can manifest peace. I can manifest a consciousness which is loving, which is intelligent, which is understanding, which is compassionate. Compassion is a beautiful word, but I think, again, it has not been carefully described, and Dr. Hoare has given a beautiful definition. It's the understanding of the lack of understanding.
Well, on that, we're going to have to stop for today and go further with that in our next encounter on Metapsychiatry. So thank you, Ruth, for being here today.
Thank you, and I look forward to that next encounter, and we will start with compassion because it's a very important word.